people from Singapore, from SPH here, Singapore Press Holdings, can rest easy because I showed this chart yesterday to some of your people in new media and received an excellent answer to them. Because in my course in the United States, I generally, in the first day or two of the course, show my postgraduate students this chart of information. It's actually data from the Nielsen Company about rankings and traffic on top newspaper websites. Ranked here, obviously, by the traffic, the New York Times being the leading site. This is figures from actually August in 2007. And by the way, I have the current figures, but I don't currently have the rights to show them to an audience. But they haven't changed that much. New York Times, almost 14 million unique users. 370 million web pages per month. But look at the other columns. How many web pages per visitor per month? How many visits per visitor per month? The New York Times in my country, the premier newspaper in my country, and you'll forgive me, people from the Straits Times, some people are saying it's the premier newspaper in the English language. The average user of their website visits the website 4.05 times per month. Their average user. That's once a week. That's the New York Times' average user. That average user will see 27 web pages all month long and spend only 20 minutes per month visiting that website. And the figures aren't that much different. In fact, they're actually worse for most other major U.S. newspapers, including things like the Wall Street Journal here on line number 4, where it's not that much different. 9 minutes, 55 seconds per month. And in the UK, France, Spain, large countries where there are a very large number of domestic magazines, domestic topical channels, and domestic websites, what we're finding are people don't use the general interest media as much anymore because they have so many other choices they're gravitating to. I hate to say that, but that's one of the reasons why circulation and readership, as well as radio listenership and TV viewership for general interest, the old-fashioned networks in my country and other countries, in large industrial countries, are seeing declines in their traffic. People are gravitating to what matches their interest and not using the general interest media anymore. When I, by the way, showed these figures yesterday to people from SPH's New Media, they said, well, our average user comes in about twice a day. And believe me, most newspapers in the world would love to have that problem. You know, here you're in good shape. You have excellent media, and you have people who are well educated and consume it very well and care about their country. But in other countries, such as my own, we have, to a large degree, the opposite problem. And this is why newspapers are failing in the United States. People are no longer using them because they have so many other choices. They're gravitating elsewhere. And in the news industry, one of the problems we've had in the past is that a press has to print the same thing for everybody at once. That's a technological limitation of Gutenberg's press or the Chinese press or whoever invented the press. And we tend to pick stories according to two criteria if we're in the news industry. One, we want to include all the stories the editor thinks everybody should be informed about. The scandal stories, the major political stories or taxation stories, the disaster stories. And the second criteria, primarily, is stories that have the greatest common interest. There's a story I tell and also use in my classroom that I haven't been able to use this month. In fact, I can't use it every 4 years. And that's, I'm a football fan. I don't mean American football. I mean football, or soccer as we call it in the U.S. And I subscribe to the New York Times. And the New York Times doesn't publish any stories about football unless the World Cup is on. During the other 47 months every 4 years, unless North Korea is playing South Korea, and there's a political angle to it, they don't publish football stories. They do American football, but not, as we call it in the U.S., soccer stories. Yet I'm the Reuters executive. I was their executive in New York, who one day got a call from the New York Times newsroom and said, can we buy your soccer wire? Because we want to have all these stories come in case there's something interesting. And I know that newsroom is getting 200 to 300 soccer stories a day. But they're not using it because they have to publish the same edition to everybody in New York, and most people and most Americans are interested in baseball or basketball or golf. And so no soccer stories appear, except luckily during the World Cup right now, or at least up to last week. And I live, by the way, with a Spanish woman, and it was a good week for me. But I'm digressing. So there's a distribution problem here. Stories are existing, but they're not getting to people. For instance, in the New York City area alone, there's probably hundreds of thousands of football fans who aren't getting their stories because we're using older technologies. We're still producing content, be it broadcast or print, based on the old technologies and the old models. Stories exist, they're not getting to people. And that's a big problem. It's one of the reasons why, again, newspaper circulation is declining in my country, is because soccer fans like me aren't going to the New York Times sports section. In fact, I'm thinking of actually, dare I say it, not renewing my subscription because I'm not getting a lot of the information I want. And instead, people are using things like this. In fact, I probably should have put this slide a little while earlier on it. This is why Google is a $26 billion a year turnover company. Because people are going and finding information. So this concept of gravitation, be it in 2001 or 2010 or whatever, is reshaping. It's natural human dynamics. People are going to go and get the content they want, and that's going to change our business models, our business. And unfortunately, it's going to result in stories like this. Business models that are based upon scarce or limited distribution channels, scarcity information, no longer work, unfortunately. It's a fact of life nowadays. It's causing major turmoil in the news industries. It's why there's declines, why in many of these countries, thankfully not here yet to a degree, there's these death spirals. This is a chart, and forgive me, this is actually a PowerPoint 2003 versus 2007 version where it's kind of hard to see these numbers, but this is a circulation of newspapers in my country since 1980 to 2010. It started to fall off a cliff. And that cliff came about 2004, 2005, when the majority of the American population got broadband access to the internet and was all of a sudden able to get all this information instantly, be it video, audio, or text. And in most countries, newspaper circulation started to plummet at roughly that time. I haven't looked at the Singaporean figures, but I dare say that there was certainly a downslope at that point. And this figure is okay. This is actually from the Newspaper Association of America, but if I correlate this decline and adjust it for the U.S. population, I actually get something like this, where it used to be that 62% of Americans read a newspaper daily. Now it's around a third of the population. In my country, household penetration, the number of newspapers received per household has declined from 1.3 daily to about a little over half of households receiving a newspaper in the United States at the beginning of this decade. And the belief nowadays is that it's now less than 50%, a minority of people in my country read newspapers each day. What's that say for the future of my country? For an informed populace, an educated populace. Not very good things. There's a former newspaper executive and now a professor emeritus at the University of North Carolina named Philip Meyer, who looked at this math and figured out that in my country, the last newspaper subscription will be canceled in September of 2022. And he wrote this book 3 years ago, and he's recently come out with a second edition, and he's had to update the figure. And, I get a kick out of it too, but to a degree it's a tragedy. It's a problem. We've got to find a way of being able to come up with media that will be used by people, that will give them what they want and get information to them and also make money, be sustainable.